We at the Everything Red Deer podcast acknowledge that it is recorded on Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 land, as well as on a historic gathering place of the Métis. We thank the elders and knowledge keepers who remain with us today and those who've gone before us. This acknowledgement is small but meant nonetheless as an act of reconciliation and gratitude.
Local, credible, now. You're listening to the Everything Red Deer podcast, powered by RD News Now. We talk to the movers, shakers, and newsmakers around Red Deer and Central Alberta, then bring those interviews to you. And now, here's your host, Josh Hall.
Yes, I am Josh Hall, and this is the premiere episode of the Everything Red Deer podcast, powered by RD News Now. This podcast is a long time coming, and I'll tell you right off the bat that it's a bit of a passion project for myself. That's really characteristic of all of us here at RD News Now, though, when I talk about passion. We are in this line of work because we love being journalists. We love being the source of information for people from all walks of life. We enjoy heading to the scene. We get excited about interviewing junior hockey players. We're eager to ask the next hard question to the mayor or the premier. Current events are our jam. And this podcast will be an extension of that for you, our loyal readers and now listeners, perhaps. Hopefully there will be many of you. So here's what this podcast will be all about. Not just this episode, but going forward. You heard it in the intro. We're going to bring you some of our best interviews with the movers, shakers, and newsmakers. That's an industry term. Sounds kind of corny, but I also thought it sounded cool because it rhymes. So who doesn't like a good rhyme, right? So it won't always be me interviewing folks on this podcast. I've been here for 10 years, but we have a great lineup of staff here at RD News Now, from Ashley LaValle Koenig and Ian Gustafson, who cover Central Alberta like myself, Jordan Rain, who is our Rocky Mountain House reporter, and of course, longtime local news reporter turned Alberta News Director for the Pattison Media Alberta Division, Sheldon Spackman. They'll all be on here at some point or another, hopefully, with conversations about a smorgasbord of things happening around the region. I sometimes get asked what my favorite part of this job is, and it's kind of two things, to be honest. The variety. We cover it all, from social issues to science, human interest to healthcare, and politics to sports, arts, and entertainment. It's really never a dull day in the news industry. Number two is you. The people we get to meet. It's not just the premier and the mayor and the hockey players and the famous people. Although there have been many of those that we've had the privilege of speaking to. Honestly, it's the everyday Red Deerians, the everyday Albertans telling us about their stories that get us the most excited. Meeting them and just having a casual conversation at the Christmas wish breakfast or an off-the-record chat with the family in the local neonatal intensive care unit, or calling up Brent or Brian Sutter to find they've answered the phone while driving the combine out at the farm. They're all exciting for us, and they all make our job worthwhile. We love it all. And I'm very happy if you have made it this far on the podcast listening to me. It's been a long time since I was, quote-unquote, on the air. About a decade, actually. It's almost time, though, for our first feature interview. And yes, it is with the Mayor of Red Deer, Ken Johnston. So stick around for that. We're getting there really quickly. Let me tell you first about all the ways you can connect with RD News Now, in case you didn't know already, because I know we pump our messaging out about it frequently and in many places. First off, our website and all of our content is free, and you can access it through rdnewsnow.com. You can also find us on Blue Sky, TikTok, YouTube, Twitter. Yes, I'm calling it Twitter, even though it looks a lot different from the Twitter that I signed up for back around 2009. Some people these days are calling it X. We do have well-followed Instagram and Facebook pages as well, but those are inaccessible to Canadians at the moment, though I won't dive too deeply into that. Then, perhaps most importantly, you can download our mobile app on the Google Play and Apple App Stores, and you can subscribe to our free daily newsletter. Very convenient, very cost-effective, very mindful, and very demure. no skibbity. Our newscasts can also be heard, of course, multiple times daily on Big 105 and 106.7 Rewind Radio, and you can submit news tips or suggestions to us by emailing, news@rdnewsnow.com. You can also submit events for our community calendar. If you have a poster for an event, send it to us. Just not the day before, please. Give us a little bit of time to get it up there and get some promotion for your event. And we're very happy to help you do that, by the way. So send it to us, news@rdnewsnow.com. Anywho, that's enough of me. The wait is over. Well, sort of, because I'm still going to be talking with the mayor in a few minutes here. But the wait is over. Shall we get to our first interview, or what? This week, I sat down in studio here at Pattison Media Red Deer on historic Bremner Avenue with Red Deer Mayor Ken Johnston, and we talked about a number of pertinent and pressing matters. Without further ado, here is our conversation. Time to welcome the very first guest of the Everything Red Deer podcast, powered by RD News Now. We are in studio here at Pattison Media Red Deer on Bremner Avenue, historic Bremner Avenue, if you will. And welcome Mayor Ken Johnston.
Well, Josh, let me just say the honor of being your first guest is not lost on me at all. You know, it's a pleasure to come out. And you're right, we are on historic Bremner. This has been a site of many commercial locations, many iterations of businesses over the years. It's the doorway to Bauer Mall and all those good things. So it's just a kick to be with you this morning.
Every time I come into work here, Ken, I always think about the Black Knight.
Yes.
Because when I started here in 2015, it was there, and we were here when it came down, which was quite the sight, and it just still feels a little weird not being there, but we've got some good new neighbors in here as well, and which is good to see that land is being able to be sold and businesses new businesses are going in. That's good news, right?
Absolutely. You know, and thank you for bringing up the Black Knight. You know, back in the day when I was in banking, I'd come up to Red Deer from time to time on the audit team, and that was one of the go-to places in the city was the Black Knight. You know, and you had that sort of iconic chess piece Black Knight emblem that you saw there, and all those things. Ken Mandrusiak was such an incredible community supporter. Certainly sad. I'm the same. You know, when COVID hit, it just accelerated the woes of the hospitality industry enormously, and they just couldn't navigate that. And so I'm in the same camp. It's great to see the new businesses that are there. But my goodness, we said goodbye to a pretty iconic business, that's for sure.
We'll always remember the steak sandwiches, right?
We certainly will. And you know, thank you for bringing up what I would call a fixture on the menu for so many people over the years, and it had that reputation across the city. If you were looking for a steak sandwich, the Black Knight was the place to go.
Yes. Now, I started here in January 2015, and one of my very first beats was covering city council.
Yeah.
And you were there. You were a city councilor at the time, and not long before that. You can remind me exactly which year you started on council. I think you were on your first term at that time, correct?
I was. I started in 2013, so we were elected in that fall, 2013.
Right. And you had come from the banking industry, as you mentioned.
I did.
So my first question for you is, what made you go from banking to politics?
Great question. You know, banking is at its core a very relational business. It's a people business. And so when I came to Red Deer in 1996, one of the, I wouldn't call it a requirement of the job, but certainly it was expected by the community and also expected by the bank in those days, that you would get involved in the community and you would be someone that would be a prominent, what I would call in those days, a prominent volunteer and so on. I had a track record in various communities of volunteering and being of service. So when I came to Red Deer, it was a continuation of that. And I found the city in many areas, in the Chamber and the Westerner, the organizations that I served with, Stars Air Ambulance, the United Way, McMahon, all those great places. Such a great city, such a giving city. When I decided to retire from banking, I'd had about 40 years. And, it was one of those things where I needed, really, I think to make a change in life. I hadn't quite turned 60 yet, and I thought I had some years left of service. Council seemed to be an avenue that I thought I could help with. And I just put myself to the public and let them decide if they wanted to give me that honor, and that's the way it turned out.
So 2021 rolls around, and you run for mayor.
Yes.
What was it that made you say, "I want to move from the semicircle that is council"? If anybody's ever been in Red Deer council chambers, it's like a horseshoe, I guess, and then the mayor sits in the chair's position, facing the rest of council. What made you want to become mayor? Especially you're here in Red Deer. You're not from Red Deer.
Right.
You're from Newfoundland.
Yes.
I guess what made you want to be in that position, and did you ever think that maybe you could be the mayor one day?
Well, to your last question, I never did think I could be the mayor one day. It was never an ambition of mine to become mayor. And in 2021, I'm remarried, as most people know, and my fiance in those days, we had fully resigned ourselves, if you will, to retiring. I had done a couple of terms on council. I was happy with the work that I did, and so on. But I just got this unrest, if you will. The mind, body, and the soul have to be in alignment with each other, and I didn't find peace over my decision to leave public life. So at the time I went to see the mayor, I told her that I intended to run in the fall. I thought that we needed to reconnect with the city. I thought we needed to reconnect with the community. I thought City Hall had become isolated in many ways, and COVID certainly certainly contributed to that. And so I decided that I would put myself out to the public again and see if that vision of mine resonated with the public, and whether they would endorse me as their mayor. And obviously, and I think I told you this, Josh, on the night that I was elected, it remains the singular greatest honor of my lifetime. An honor, I'll say again, that I never pursued. It just seemed to come to me. And when I saw it, I tested it internally, tested it in the community, and then decided to run in the election of 2021.
What was your vision at the time, and how has it changed?
Great
if
question.
At all.
Yeah, no, great question. At the time, I'll say again, I thought we had become isolated. I thought we had not built up the what I would call strategic partnerships that a city needs. And in our case, that would include RDP, Red Deer Poly, the Westerner, the airport, the province of Alberta, the Chamber of Commerce, the social agencies, the minorities, certainly the agencies that work on a street level, and so on. The folks that didn't see, and I heard this many times during that campaign of 2021, they didn't see themselves at City Hall. They didn't hear their voice at City Hall. They didn't, see the issues that concerned them at City Hall. And over the years, and I can't believe it's now over 3 years. I've worked very, very hard to build those partnerships and to get some alignment between people, because that's really what it's all about now, is trying to align people in a direction where everyone is contributing, not just the city, quote unquote, saying so or legislating some kind of partnership. This is really an opportunity to bring people together at a ground level. So the vision hasn't changed, and it's really exciting to see different parts of the community take on roles or beginning to take on roles that they weren't as little as 3, 4, 5 years ago.
We do have a few topics to get to, but I want to ask because next year is the next municipal election.
Yes.
I guess a little less than a year from now, October, I believe. What would you say to people who are out there thinking that maybe they want to be on city council?
Well, certainly there are people out there that are looking at the election in the fall, and I really encourage them. I get calls. It shouldn't surprise you. I get calls from folks that want to have coffee and talk about what does council life look like. What I would encourage people, first of all, very pragmatically, is to just assess your own ability. Do you have the time, and do you have what I would call the relational quotient of being a counselor? It's not an easy life, and so when I talk about that, are you skilled in dealing with people? Are you skilled in dealing with groups? Can you see all sides of an issue? Keep in mind that council is a body of people. It is just not you coming with a particular issue or whatever. It's the ability to work across 7 or 8 or 9 people and get a consensus and so on.
Thanks for elaborating on that, because there's so much talk these days about democracy, and people complain about things, rightfully so. And
yes,
I've always kind of gone by the motto, like, if you don't vote, then you can't complain. There's been a lot of conjecture over the years about whether being on city council is a part-time or a full-time gig.
Right.
And obviously being the mayor is a full-time gig, especially of Red Deer. And I'm sure you're on the go all the time. I'm surprised you even had an hour to come in here and do this. So,
I look at this as an ability and a way, obviously, of communicating with the community, and so I value a time like this for sure.
All right, so let's dive into some of the other harder topics,
Totally.
Mr. Mayor. I'll try and ask you some hard questions. By the way, does anybody ever actually call you Your Worship?
Great. That's a great question. When I got elected, I really discouraged the term "Your Worship," and God bless history and our sort of our precedents and our protocol and all those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. But it's 2021, or was when I got elected, not 1821,
right?
And so I like going by Mayor Ken. Some people just go Mayor. Some people just go Ken. I'm good. My mother, who's no longer with us, would always say, "Now, Ken, don't let your pride get in the way, and come down to earth from time to time." and so I look at titles. Yeah, they're transitory, Josh.
That's fair. Okay, so one of the biggest topics in this country right now, not just the city, is the cost of everything.
Yes.
And inflation.
Yes.
How hard it is for people to get by.
Yes.
In just the last couple of weeks, City Council passed its operating and capital budgets for 2025, and the operating budget includes the largest tax increase that I've seen in my time here, which is a decade, 10.5% property tax increase. So obviously there's a lot of layers to what goes into a tax increase, whether it's 1% or 10.5% or more. So if you could explain to folks, for maybe the ones who didn't get a chance to listen in to budget debate, or maybe they haven't had a chance to read coverage at rdnewsnow.com, what goes into the 10.5% and why this year is it so high?
Yeah. That's a great series of questions.
I try to ask one at a time.
For sure. No, great series of questions. And, you started it, I think, very well by reflecting on inflation and so on. And, There's the municipal impact of inflation that most consumers don't see. So the municipal impact, of inflation would occur in construction, it would occur in policing, it would occur in equipment, fleet equipment, transit equipment. It certainly would occur in recreation and so on. So certainly there was the inflationary impact, but every city sees an inflationary impact, every province and so on. So we're not particularly, special or unique in dealing with inflation, but it is a factor and a major factor of what we were doing. In many ways, if I was to sit with a citizen this morning and take him through the budget process, I would reflect on a couple of things. One is historically, and you mentioned it's the largest increase since you've come to Red Deer. It is not, however, the largest increase since I've come to Red Deer.
Fair.
We've had a few series of years. I'll say 205 to 208. I probably have those wrong, but there are 3 years there where it was 11, 12, and 13 and a half and so on. And we fell, when I say we, collectively, council and administration, we fell into what I would call a poor habit of not addressing the actual costs of City Hall other than bringing it down with reserves or hoping growth would catch up to us and those kinds of things. These last 5 years have been very difficult on Red Deer. We haven't grown to the extent that again, and I'll go back to why I ran for mayor in 2021. We needed to kickstart the engine and become more collaborative on how we approach the economy and how we approach growth. So the last 5 years have been difficult, and 2 of those years we decided to go with a 0% tax situation, which in retrospect, and how many of us would not look back on decisions and say, gosh, I wish I had that to do over again. In retrospect, not a great decision for us. And if you look at the graph of taxation in Red Deer, I'll say for the last 20 years, typically we had very, very low periods, and then all of a sudden it's skyrocket. In this case, I'll say the word skyrocket to 11, 12, 13%. Mm-hmm. So in the last 5, 6, 7 years, we've been 3.5, 4, 5.5, 2.5, 3.5, 0, 0, et cetera, et cetera. Many councillors during the debate talked about no longer wanting to kick this problem down the road. In other words, we were leaning too heavily on reserves and not enough on a dependable, revenue stream. It was such a difficult debate because there's not a soul on council or administration or any of us from that perspective that would want to say to someone with any kind of pride, if you will, or success that we're not disadvantaging you, we're not costing you. That was the emotional weight. There were tears in council during the debate. There was anger, there was frustration, there was resignation. In the context of reality, it made the debate very, very hard from that perspective. But it actually started in February and led to November. This was a 7 or 8 month process. We wrestled with every single business line in the city.
Right, because even having to approve a 10.5% property tax increase, which amounts to a couple or a few $100s for the average home over the course of a year.
Yes.
There are still other things, as I think you were just alluding to, that get cut in the budget, and that's, like you mentioned, the tiers. Maybe the tiers are partially for having to approve such a large increase,
yes,
but perhaps some of them were for having to cut certain things that maybe don't necessarily deserve to be cut.
Well, in some cases, that's what makes decisions so very, very difficult because anytime you bring cuts to the table, and cuts are a way of checking the value of a program or the value of an investment in an organization, or invariably the common denominator in cuts is people. And that's what made things so emotional. No one wanted to go to homeowners and say, we need another $25 or $30 a month for your taxes. But at the same time, we wanted to make sure that the services that Red Deerians are depending on, right, particularly those that are of our lower income, particularly transit, recreation, parks, all those things that enable people access to Red Deer. Right. Those were preserved, and certainly that's that was the emotional quotient. Without excusing it at all, I think it's important for us to still realize that Red Deer is still very competitively positioned in relation to other municipalities for taxation. We're not the head of the pack. We've always been in the middle of the pack. Even with this increase, we'll remain in the middle of the pack. Mm-hmm. And that's very important, I think. People would appreciate that after this budget, the services they depend on are not only still in place, but are positioned to have the funding to keep them in place.
There are many variables which go into subsequent budgets, and you can't just look into a crystal ball and see what's going to happen a year from now when you go to the 2026 budget debate. But is there any mechanism that allows the city to project if the next several years are going to be 10.5%, 15%, or is there any way to say, like, this is a one-off?
Yeah, that's a great question because, as you say, there are a lot of variables that come to play. My goodness, I mean, I would hate to have a failure of a water treatment plant or key infrastructure, pipes, et cetera. Those are always factors at play, and so on. I mentioned the word growth before. Mm-hmm. Growth is the engine that cities depend on to be able to assess what can we expect for cash flow? Can we finance and continue to finance? Again, I'll say our recreation systems, our transit, our policing, our fire departments, all of those kinds of things. If you were to look at 2024 in a very sort of calendar level, 12 months, you'll see we've had record housing starts this year. Our development permits are also at a record level. Mm-hmm. Capstone is moving. Our tourism is moving. There's a great swell of small business in the city. All of these contribute to a far more dependability on what revenue streams will be and should be. So as we go into 2025, council will need and administration will need to be able to look at those factors, but also, and administration referenced this in the budget of 2024, also prioritizing what business lines, for want of a better word, or what areas should the city be invested in and what areas should the city not be invested in as a city. That'll be an interesting journey for council and administration to take in 2025 and likely 2026.
It's been interesting also watching the population number kind of slowly go up.
Yes.
I think it was 8 or 9 years ago that we had a big celebration out at City Hall Park for hitting 100,000.
Yes.
And then it's kind of gone up and down, but I think we're at about 108 right now. And growth isn't just strictly about the number of people, but that is kind of a big part of it.
Well, it definitely is, and to in many ways, well, certainly in some ways, I'll say, growth can be its own challenge at the same time. When I think of, for example, other cities of our size, I'll say Airdrie, maybe a bit of an outlier being so close to Calgary, but Lethbridge, for example, Grand Prairie, Fort McMurray, typically Medicine Hat, typically those cities are what we sort of group ourselves in. There's no doubt the energy business, in many ways, the servicing of it, moved north for those few years. That definitely, impacted us without a doubt. We lost business to Red Deer County. That's hurt us without question. That seems to be coalescing now, and so on. So there's factors there that caused us, and in again, in hindsight, when you get into the factors that are approaching you that way, affecting you that way, you need also to react financially to them as well. So should we have taken a 3.5% tax increase and made it 5.5%, or taken that 0 and made it 3%, and taking the next 0 and made it 3%? I remember, and Councillor Lee, if he's listening to this, he will love this. I remember Councillor Lee back in the day, and I think it was maybe 2019, Josh, or 20, when we had a mid-year review, he recommended we add 2% to the budget then. We didn't do it. And it certainly, in hindsight, would have taken the sticker shock. We see other communities around us at 6.5%, and Calgary at, Lethbridge at 7%, et cetera, et cetera. And that sticker shock, again, in hindsight, we likely could have avoided.
Okay, we're here talking with Red Deer Mayor Ken Johnston. In just a few minutes, we're going to talk about the subject of homelessness, and we're going to talk about another thing that's very personal to the mayor, the Red Deer Regional Hospital expansion project.
Yes, indeed.
We're back with Red Deer Mayor Ken Johnston here on the first ever episode of the Everything Red Deer podcast, powered by RD News Now. I'm your host, Josh Hall. Ken is in studio with us here at 2840 Bremner Avenue, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Red Deer Regional Hospital Center redevelopment project. $1.8 billion, the largest ever healthcare redevelopment project in Alberta history, if I'm not mistaken. That's what I've heard.
100%.
Yes.
That is totally accurate.
And I think your story and why it's personal to you is pretty well documented. I know I've covered it a few times, seeing things go up with the construction and being in the hospital and seeing things they're working on. The redevelopment is a project that I've heard many say that we needed 10 years ago, yes, not now, maybe more than 10 years ago. So just seeing that, what does it evoke in you?
Well, certainly a great sense of hope. When I think of the many patients, not just my own family's story, which I think most Red Deerians get that and understand that, and I appreciate that. The outpouring of support over the years has certainly been appreciated, and so on. So I say sense of hope. Because, to your point, Josh, really, this hospital expansion, wouldn't it be great to say we're cutting the ribbon in 2025, not sticking shovels in the ground in 2025? That really is where, the community has asked for, I'd say, a decade and a half. It depends on who you speak with. The doctor groups have been active in this space since 2007. That's 17 years ago. So there's a great sense of hope. There's certainly a great sense that the province has now recognized that this central zone, which is, really, I'll say Hanna to the east and Hinton to the west, Olds in the south, and say Wetaskiwin in the north, there's about 500,000 people there. who have been now with a hospital at capacity for easily 10 years. And they're recognizing now that not just to make that up, but to position us as being a center of medical excellence here, I would argue for the next 20, 30, maybe more years. We're already starting to see the on-the-ground impacts in Red Deer. We've got new clinics opening. The Greyhound lot just sold on the corner for another medical clinic. There will be some community announcements in 2025 as we prepare ourselves for the hospital expansion. It's going to impact every part of Red Deer, not just the medical part. It's going to affect employment. It's going to affect suppliers. It's going to impact housing. It's going to stimulate growth here on a scale that I would argue we haven't seen. And I'll even say the Nova plant in the Nova plant expansion of the mid-90s, this project will dwarf, which is saying something, to close to a $2 billion project.
And of course, we're slated to get a cath lab earlier than when the rest of the redevelopment project will be completed, which 2031 rather, 2032. But the government said, it'll be functional as it moves along. And I just want to say that I was recently in the hospital, actually twice, once for an x-ray for a broken toe, and once overnight. I was there for about 40 hours recently for some kidney stones. Extremely painful, by the way. But my point is, I just wanted to mention that I think when we talk about the hospital and long wait times and that this should have been done a long time ago, we kind of forget to talk about just how great of a job the staff at the hospital are doing. And it makes me a little emotional, actually, to be honest, because it's tough being in the hospital. Like, just being in a hospital is it can be triggering for people because maybe they've had a traumatic experience in a hospital with somebody else and maybe they passed away or something like that. And to be in there yourself, and you got to wait a long time sometimes, but those folks over there, the nurses, the doctors, the surgeons, they're quite exemplary at what they do. And I know you've had experiences in the hospital too. So,
thank you for using the word exemplary. The level of professionalism is astounding at the hospital, and it always has been. In our own particular experience, we were roughly 3.5 months of being there, being in intensive care, and that gave me an opportunity to, I shouldn't use the word wander, to have a city councilor in those days wandering through wards in the hospital, but it allowed me to stop at different nursing stations, get talking to people, get an understanding of the pressures that the hospital was under. And even though our doctors, nurses, physiotherapists, respiratory folks,
porters. The porters.
The porters. Thank you for mentioning the porters. Unsung heroes.
Yes, totally.
Ambulance attendants. Well said. Here's to the porters, I say. Even though they're under those conditions, they seem to embrace us as patients in a way that says you're important. We're going to look after you. This is how we're going to proceed now, and so on. So a lot of heroes in that hospital. It's so great to see the cardiac cath lab. I'm grateful to the foundation, grateful to the province to advance the funding and so on, because cardiac risk remains so prevalent in central Alberta.
Let's transition to our final main subject of the interview today. Again, we're talking with Red Deer Mayor Ken Johnston. Homelessness.
Yes.
It's hard to decide where to start on this subject because there, as with the other stuff, there's so many layers. Red Deer City Council just last week approved a 2-year extension of the zoning for the temporary shelter downtown, in rail yards, technically speaking, run by Safe Harbor. There have been changes recently to the overdose prevention site. And last week we got updated numbers from the point-in-time homeless count for 2024. And the numbers are a little startling, maybe not surprising, because I'm sure people within the municipality kind of saw this coming. But it's for the everyday Red Deerian, maybe they expected it to a degree too, but seeing it actually put officially on paper is a little shocking. So in 2024, and this number, as the report notes, is likely to increase once other data is finalized, 766 people were counted. This is new info out last week. That's more than double the 334 from 2022. 144 were counted in 2018, 149 in 2016, 279 in 2012. And we could break down the 766 counted this year in many different ways. Indigenous people overrepresented. 65%, I think, are male. 5% are veterans. It's a sad situation. And for a long time, not to drone on, Mr. Mayor, but the city has long spent many hours in council chambers trying to deal with the different aspects of homelessness, whether it was trying to get a warming shelter in place, which was amounted to like a trailer down by Safe Harbor, or trying to get the permanent shelter, which funding was announced for in 2019, actually off the ground. $7 million was announced in early 2019 by the then NDP government to build a permanent shelter. The UCP reaffirmed that funding when they were elected a few months later. It's now 2024, and you and I have had lots of conversations about the shelter, whether it's in council chambers or just out in the community in other interviews and for other reasons. So we're here at the end of 2024, and we still don't have an end in sight. At least the public doesn't have the end in sight for the shelter, the permanent shelter. So what is your message? What is your update to Red Deerians about what is happening with the permanent shelter?
Well, thank you, Josh. There's certainly no shortage of topics in what you just relayed there, and they're certainly accurate. Thank you for using the word tragic around the homelessness point-in-time numbers. They weren't surprising, and that's not to minimize the tragedy of these numbers. But when we look at the number of encampments we have, when we look at the waiting lists for supportive housing, and so on, visually, when we look across our community, and not just our community, about 2 years ago, a Red Deer County councillor said to me that homelessness is becoming an issue in Red Deer County. Lacombe, Black Falls, Penhold, and so on. We're seeing really, I'll say this in reaction, to the point in time count numbers. There's no shelter that ever would have been imagined that would house 700 people.
Exactly.
That is, I mean, in many ways, when we think of shelters, they're not intended in solving the housing issue. What we have, in every way, is a housing issue that's complicated and layered in mental health, in addiction, in poverty, in interprovincial migration, in immigration, all of those factors that are coming to bear on some of the numbers that we have. If we have, I would say, failed, and not just as I'm saying failed as a country. It is that we have not coherently understand what I mean in a piece-by-piece understandable way address the issue of housing in this country. That's really when we look at a point in time count that's double or getting to be triple what we have. Other cities of our size haven't released their numbers. Would I be surprised if they were similar? I certainly wouldn't be surprised because this is affecting every city coast to coast. So it becomes quite an issue of housing. And certainly the community will be aware that for the last 3 years, I have railed for more housing support in the city. We've had applications go in front of CMHC that were declined. We couldn't even find why they were declined. I will say, I mean, I remain encouraged that Red Deer Housing has an application in front of CMHC now, and so does the city. The Red Deer Housing one is plus or minus $16 million. Ours is plus or minus $30 million. And that's in front of CMHC right now. However, when we inquired as to where we might get an answer from CMHC, we were told that they were doing their best and so on. So it's important, I think, and I'll talk about the shelter specifically in a second here. Yeah. But the point-in-time numbers, they're tragic. Thank you again for using that word. Quite sad in many ways that people in this country, in a developed country, still don't have a place to put their head. So quite sad. But they have their roots in an undersupply of housing that we need as a society to fully grasp, and we just haven't fully grasped it. Again, I'll say we're making improvements, and we have applications and so on, but we haven't fully grasped it. As to the shelter itself, again, I'll say it was never the intention to build a shelter that would hold 400, 500, 600, 700 people. That was never the intention. In saying that, we have been asking the province for their own vision of a shelter so that we could go to the community. We've looked at 100 sites now. We've had 4 declined by various levels, et cetera. And it makes it a very, very frustrating, situation. I take some optimism that we asked the province for an expression of interest to operators of shelter. That was about 5 months ago. That has been issued. And my understanding, it is closed now, and the results will be coming to us. That'll enable us to be able to work with a potential operator and put that community vision together. I think when we jumped into this with all the right intent and so on, but when we jumped into this, it was only to provide a location for the shelter. Not in any way the operating side of it or whatever the case may be. I think the community has yet to come to terms with it, and that's why we still find ourselves without a site today.
Is it a guarantee that it actually ever gets built?
I think it's very much a guarantee in the context of, and maybe, in some ways we're mirroring the hospital issue. Our current shelter is at capacity. There's a reality in that. 40,000
visits, I think.
Yeah, I think if you tuned in the public hearing last week, you know that a visit is not necessarily 40,000 people, but it speaks to how busy the shelter is.
In and out.
No question. Yeah. And so, our shelter is at capacity, and it'll be interesting to see what the province's vision for what a shelter at capacity will be. Will it be a 300-bed now shelter?
Or are they going to pony up for an 800?
Correct.
Yeah.
Again, I'll say housing remains the number one issue, particularly permanent supportive housing. However, there is a demographic that needs to be dealt with here. And the reality of that is those numbers, housing will take time, And those numbers still are a challenge for the current system.
Okay. I have one main question left about this subject.
Sure.
And then we'll wrap this up here.
Sure.
So there's a matter of jurisdiction that I've heard a lot, like with council saying, we can do something with this X subject because it's a municipal issue.
Right.
And then there's another thing, this is provincial jurisdiction, so the province should be dealing with it,
Yes.
or the federal government should be dealing with
Yes.
it. Earlier you mentioned that with budget, in hindsight, that maybe a few years ago, the city or city council shouldn't have approved a 0% property tax increase. It should have been 2 or 3%, so that now we wouldn't have to have a 10.5% increase necessarily. Maybe we still would, but who's to say? With the matter of housing, I think it's fair to say that's not necessarily a municipal jurisdiction issue. But on the same note, going back to what you said about how maybe council should have done something different with property tax increases in years past, do you think there's anything that the city and city council could have or should have done differently in recent years past, to address the housing and the homelessness subject?
Well, sure. I mean, let's take them, separately, even though there's a linkage, obviously, between them. But I think it's easier if I was to answer it separately. So let's talk about the housing side of it, and so on. So it became very early in my term that we got into some zoning changes, which was critical in those days, that we take what levers we could and then allow the province and the federal government, who are the funders in housing. The city is not in any way a direct funder of housing, but we can play a role, and most often that role is a zoning role. So we talked a little bit about the Black Knight and so on. So we rezoned some properties on Gates. We rezoned some properties on North Gates, along Taylor Drive. Typically, when you get into rezonings that allow a more densification of housing, they are close to community amenities. They are close to transit, all of the things that make sense for people that are looking for either affordable housing or subsidized housing. We also backstopped a loan application for Red Deer Housing with $1 million. We have $1 million of civic money ready to go, ready to be invested. We've played very active roles in helping other societies, other housing groups, put applications together, advocate to the federal government and the provincial government as well. We have been active on that front, and I will say, we haven't mentioned it yet, but I'll certainly be happy to, that the work of the Chamber report in April led to the impetus of a housing foundation, which is getting its legs underneath it, getting its charter, if you will, its ability to be active from a charitable perspective in the community, and have some great citizens on board. That's an example of some of the collaboration I referenced when I ran for mayor. It's that we can't, as a community, sort of even point at even other levels of government and say, you need to do more, you need to do less, or whatever the case may be. We have to be in this together where we can be. And I think that's going to help us in housing. I think the landscape, no pun intended, for 2025 will see some breakthroughs in housing. I really believe that. At least it's my fervent prayer that we get some action out of Central Mortgage and Housing to get these applications moving. As it relates to the shelter, if we had our time back, and I think that's your question, Josh.
Yeah.
If we had our time back, what would we have done? I think we proceeded in a good way in this journey. I never expected to hit the wall so many times with this project. I think we took a very methodical and very, very well thought out and very considerate approach. And we were public where we could, and that was most of the time in terms of our deliberations. When we couldn't be that public, it was with negotiations with different parties and bodies and so on, deals that ultimately, obviously, didn't come through for us. I think, our conversations with the province over the last few months have been far more, come in and help us with this vision for the community. Our community still sees shelter in the way that it's being done right now. And that's no reflection on the agencies that are doing the work. They're doing the work in an environment where they're constrained. They have far more people using the service. And what used to be an emergency shelter is really now a shelter.
Yeah.
So they're doing great work. The EOI, or expression of interest I talked about, that'll be a first step in what I would call a new page here. And my fervent hope, personally, is that this get resolved before the election of 2025. I would hate for it, not because I'm shy to speak about it, but I think it would just empower a new council so much more to have this issue finalized. I really do.
Maybe we can get into a little more another time, but you mentioned the Chamber's work with the homelessness task force, and I think the Chamber's done, I guess, what you could say a good bipartisan job of focusing on both the best interests of the folks who are experiencing homelessness and wanting to do right by them, but also bringing to the table, as we've heard from certain business owners, particularly in the downtown and the rail yards area, who are being affected by certain issues. And you talked about acting on this together and being together, not being so divided. God knows we have enough division in this world, but the problems of businesses are understandable, and yet, people experiencing homelessness, they are people, they are human. So it's very hard sometimes to put yourself on both sides, because you're either a business who's experiencing some major issues, or you're empathetic to the homeless folks. But that doesn't mean the people who are in the businesses who are experiencing the problems aren't also empathetic. And we've heard that from them, say that they are. It's just a very fine line to walk. And this is, I commend council for the work that they've done. And this goes back to what I asked you earlier about who wants to run for council next year. Like, you're going to be dealing with these kinds of very difficult, gut-wrenching, divisive issues, and it's gonna affect you if you run for council. If you're on council, you're gonna have to live with hard decisions. So, almost lastly, you mentioned 2025. I'm going to put you on the spot here, and I apologize. You can say no comment. Do you plan to run for re-election in 2025?
Well, thank you, Josh.
I'm sorry to point my pen at you, by the way.
No, it's okay. All good. As I said before, it's been the singular greatest honor of my life that was conferred on me in 2021, and I have certainly applied myself, every day, in that pursuit. Red Deer is the greatest city that I've ever experienced living in, and I'm so proud of the work that our council has done. Frustration with the shelter aside, that has really affected us certainly, but we remain focused and trying to get it done. To your question about running again, a lot of people are asking me right now. You're certainly not the first. Mayor, are you going to be? What are you going to do? And I've told them at the time that I'll certainly make a community announcement in early 2025. In terms of what we can expect. I never like to say no comment. And I think your history with me will indicate that. He never says no comment.
Never. In fact, you probably sometimes give too much comment.
Exactly.
More than I asked for.
And we do media training when we get elected, and one of them is have a message, stick to it, stop. However, I come from Newfoundland. That's very hard. Culturally, we like to ramble. Anyway, I will, Josh, be happy to go to the community early in 2025, and we'll see what that brings.
Okay, I'm reading between the lines here. What's your holiday message to Red Deerians as we head towards 2025?
Well, thank you for that. The opportunity to be able to allow people or send a message to people in this period of time is appreciated. This can be a time, and often is for people, as Dickens said in A Christmas Carol back in the mid-1800s, where want is most keenly felt. And, you'll recall when the folks that were campaigning for donations came to Scrooge's office, and he asked, "What are you doing here?" "Well, sir, we're endeavoring to put something together for the poor because this is the time of year when want is most keenly felt." So the want often is not just the material want. It's often as well an emotional want. The season can trigger poor memories. The season can get you down. The season can cause you to lose faith in mankind. And it can be a dreary time for a lot of folks. Personally, I've suffered that myself. That with Isabel years and years ago, it all occurred in the Christmas season and so on. So my message to Red Deerians is this: where you can and when you can, lift people. Be conscious of people. If you are blue, if you will, yourself, find ways of dealing with that in a positive way. And talk to a friend, talk to a counselor, get some help, whatever that brings. But for sure, do not let cynicism or do not let the pace of the season take you away from opportunities to contribute, take you away from opportunities where your kindness, your time, your money can lead to someone getting through the season in a better way. The great message of Christmas from a Christian perspective is renewal and hope. And so take advantage, Red Deer, over the next 2 or 3 weeks to renew, to restore yourself, and to have hope going into 2025.
Thank you very much for that beautiful message. There's a thing reporters do sometimes. It's a little bit of a crutch, where during an interview they'll say, "This is my last question." And then there's always going to be, a good reporter will always find a follow-up question to ask. And I got through most of this interview without saying, "This is my last question." And then I did it 3 or 4 times at the end. I would love to go off on that last answer, but I know you prepped for one other one. Or at least I asked them for you to prep for one other one. And it should be it should just be a yes or no.
Okay.
Can you turn left onto a one-way street in downtown Red Deer on a red light?
Well, you certainly can. Now,
okay.
You certainly can. I've been doing that for years, not just because I feel I'm getting away with anything. It actually is in the Traffic Act.
Right.
So you can turn left. Obviously, make sure it's a safe left turn.
Right.
But there are several left turns in our downtown, and they're all accessible to the left as long as the common sense rules of the road apply. Off you go to the left.
Red Deer's downtown is a little peculiar that way, but we'll leave it at that. I just want to say thank you to you, Mayor, for being our first guest on the Everything Red Deer podcast. Hopefully, there's many more conversations that we can have on this medium, and just really thank you for coming in and sharing all your thoughts on these hard subjects and some lighter subjects. Thank you.
Always a pleasure, Josh, and we look forward to 2025.
There you have it. The first episode of the Everything Red Deer podcast, powered by RD News Now, is just about in the books. Before I let you go, though, a reminder to download our app and subscribe to the newsletter by visiting rdnewsnow.com if you haven't already. Watch for us out in the community, whether it's in our cruiser or at an event. Feel free to say hi. We're actually nice people. We don't bite. A lot of people think that journalists are scary to talk to because we're always recording, except we're not. We are allowed to and do enjoy regular, everyday chit-chat. All right, that's it. Well, sort of. Let me tell you a joke. Why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything. Fortunately, the journalists here at RD News Now don't make up everything, or anything for that matter. Remember, stay informed, stay inspired, build up your community, Red Deer. Until next time, I've been Josh Hall, and you've been listening to the Everything Red Deer podcast.
This has been the Everything Red Deer podcast, powered by RD News Now. This podcast is produced and edited by the team at RD News Now and Pattison Media Red Deer. Make sure to download our mobile app and subscribe to our free daily newsletter by visiting rdnewsnow.com. Thanks for listening.